next thing you should know about the internet and the World Wide Web is how to read domain names. You should know how to read domain names. You might think that this is kind of easy, but actually there's some complication in it. And the first thing you need to know is that a domain name, a URL, a website address, those are all terms which are synonymous. So anytime you hear somebody say, hey, what's your domain? Hey, what's your website address? Hey, what's the URL? What they're asking for is they're asking for this right here, the website address, the domain, and the URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator, Uniform URL Wiki. URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. So, you know, they're just names for the exact same thing. And the first part of any website address is going to be the HTTP part. And you've got HTTP, and that stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And that's the protocol, the rule of communication for transferring hypertext transfer protocol. And sometimes you see HTTPS. And when you see HTTPS, right, so we're starting to break down a domain name or a URL so that we can understand it. When you see HTTPS, that means Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. So anytime you see that, you know that you are communicating securely with whatever website you are in contact with. So if I'm at the checkout place at Amazon, I want to make sure, or at any website, I want to make sure that it's HTTPS. So whatever I send to them is encrypted, and then nobody else could intercept it as it passes through the internet and be able to see it, because it'd be all jumbled up and encrypted. And we are going to learn what encryption is later. I will briefly show you what encryption is now. What if I showed you this right here, right? What does that mean? EPH, that is an encrypted message, and it is encrypted with an encryption key called ROT1, ROT1. And what ROT1 stands for, is rotate one. And so if I rotated my letters, right, one letter in the alphabet, if I went from D, I rotate to E. If I went from O, I would rotate to P. If I went from G, I'd rotate to H. So I encrypted the word dog by rotating just up one letter in the alphabet, and that would be a ROT1 rotation, or ROT1 encryption. Very simple encryption. And but if you saw that, you wouldn't know how to decrypt it unless you knew the encryption key, the way in which it was encrypted. And so that's how encryption works, but on a much more sophisticated level. That'd be really simple encryption and really easy to break these days. And the ROT1, ROT13, whatever, rotating in the alphabet, that's also known as the Caesar Cipher, because Caesar used to do that when he'd send messages to his generals and things like that. He would encrypt them by just rotating a certain number of characters, and then when the general got it, he'd rotate all the characters back another way and be able to understand what the message was. So when you see the HTTPS, it means that your communications are encrypted between you and whatever websites you're connected with. This all right here is actually the URL. That's all the URL. So when we get really specific, that's the URL, all this stuff up here, and the domain name is right here. That's the domain name right there. Right? That'd be the domain name, and then this would be the top level domain. And then this, of course, is just the www extension. And sometimes if you entered for a website example.com, it might not come up unless you included the www. So I was just at a website the other day and it didn't come up. Yeah, let's try it just up here. See, that added the www on for me. I don't know which one it was, but if you just enter this for these two parts right here and you don't get the website, try adding on the www. There are a variety of different TLDs out there, top level domains out there. So the top 10 TLDs for you used, right? I'm not sure what the heck the CNC is, but .com, .org, .info, .biz, China, Taiwan, Cocoa Islands, right? These are some of the main top level domains. Right, and .com is the most popular. You could go to Wikipedia and you can see, show me all the internet top level domains. And so they have some like .com, which is for doing commercial business. They have some like .gov, which I'm not seeing here. .gov, there we go, .gov, and that's for use only by the government. and in the U.S. And military is for use only by the U.S. military. And EDU is only for use by educational institutions. And what else do we have? You know, .net is usually for tech companies. Org is usually for nonprofit organizations. Yeah, and then XXX here for adult-related sites. And only some of them, you know, are more widely, you know, these different things right here, they're more widely known or used or usable. All right, so that's top-level domains. And the way a web address works, right, the way a domain works is that you enter that domain into your website browser, and it takes you to a location on the internet. So if I was to enter from my mom's website, there we go, and it takes me to my mom's website. Well, I entered the domain, and what happens like when I entered the domain, it went to something called a domain name server, a DNS server, and it said, what is the address for mclouds.com? So I already showed you this before, but if we go to start and type in CMD, bring up the command prompt, I can then ping McLeod's, and it gives me the IP address, 72.29.31.4. So if I type in 72.29.31.4, that will take me also to the mclouds.com website. And so this, you know, back in the day, they didn't have domains, and people would be like, yo, what's your website? And you'd be like 72.29.31.4, and people would be like, okay, I can't remember that. But now if you say my website is mclouds.com, they go, oh yeah, I can remember that. That's your last name with an S. And so they type that in, and then what happens is that request goes to DNS servers, and the DNS server says, well, what's the IP address? And it finds out that's the IP address, and then it retrieves the information at that location and gives it to you. So that's kind of how the entire IP address, domain name server thing works. So you are learning about URLs, right? And so URL is all of this, and you've also learned about domain names, and domain name is this. And that's also referred to sometimes as a website address. And then you've also learned about top-level domains and how some of them are restricted. And like you can only get the .mil extension if you're in the U.S. military and creating a site for something in the U.S. military, or the .gov, same, United States government, or the .edu if you're an educational institution, right? And you've learned about IP addresses and the domain name servers, DNS servers. Last thing to learn about URLs is that, like, check this out. I'm at the New York Times, and I click on an article, and then I see this question mark here, right? So actually two more things to show you about domains. So anything after the question mark is a variable. So here you see I have different variables. If I go here to like some other category and click on this, and that's interesting. And then here is a question mark, and it says ref business, right? So it's just a variable, and that variable is like that this is in the business section. And if I was to go to sports, right, and click on an article, that's kind of interesting. It now says ref sports, right? And so you'll see these variables all over the place. And there's a, you know, this site here, I don't know, they're not as round as much as they used to be, but if I went here and I went to, I don't know, communities, I just want to, member directory, there we go. And let's click on somebody. And here you can see it's member ID, and it gives me the ID. Well, is there a member 21265? And sure enough, right? So we can see how many members this organization has. We could also scroll through all the members. So this is actually bad website design these days to put critical variables up in the URL. All right, so that's kind of like how URLs work. The last thing I'll show you is if you see these slashes here, what that means is that, okay, here's the website, and then on that website there's a folder called Merlot, and then in that folder there's a page called viewmember.htm, right? And so that starts to show you the file structure. And so here at the New York Times, there's a folder called 2013, and then there's a folder called 10 for October, and then there's a folder called 7 for the day, and then there's a folder called sports, and then there's a folder called football, and then finally inside all that, you've got the pages, right? There's the file, the pages that were on this day, 10/7/2013, sports football. You got the pages, right? That the articles that were there on that day. And so that's how all their files and folders are organized on their server. And if you were to look at it, if you were to look at it, it'd actually look just like this, right? With different folder structure, you know, and you'd be just dropping through the folders on their server. So just like here, I'm in libraries, documents, videos, CIT 1509, right? I'm in libraries, documents, videos, CIT 1509, right? Just like here, those show the different folders. That's the same with website addresses, only they have slashes between them, right? Here are the slashes between the folders. So on their server, they got folders. So you've learned a lot. You've learned a lot. You've learned a lot. You've learned about URLs, which would be all of this. You've learned about domains, which would be that. You've learned about top-level domains, which would be that. You learned about folders, which are separated by slashes. So on their computer that's hosting this, right, they have different folders. So there's the 2013 folder, the 10 folder, the 7 folder, and the 10 folder is inside 2013. And inside the 10 folder is the 7 folder, and inside the 7 folder is the sports folder, and inside the sports folder is the football folder, and inside the football folder is this article, right? And then anything after the question mark is a variable. You learned about IP addresses again, and you've also learned about the DNS server once more. So that's breaking down domain names, and that's part of learning and knowing about the internet and the World Wide Web.